architecture of how we have structured it. So I'll speak about how the program started and evolved, Ralph, content and participation, and Ellen, the evaluation. We thought it was important to set the background because of the clinical significance of this topic. And most of you must be familiar with the amount of publicity that the issue of autism and autism diagnosis and interminable waiting lists has attracted in the popular media, and indeed caused distress for families of affected individuals. And broadly, there are those three categories. There are those who are not in contact with primary or secondary care health services, but are facing varying degrees of distress, probably because of a neurodevelopmental condition, whether it is autism or ADHD, and a diagnosis would help them make sense of what they are going through and improve their productivity and hopefully predict and control morbidity. There is that large group, number two, who are people with neurodevelopmental conditions who are already in contact with psychiatric or the wider mental health services. Their neurodevelopmental disorder is not adequately picked up and certainly not reflected in diagnostic formulations. And that means while that group has equity of access to healthcare, they do not have equity of treatment outcomes. And the starkest demonstration of that is every year the Department of Health has commissioned a survey of mortality and morbidity for everyone with either a learning disability and or autism. And in that group of people with autism, that group of autistic individuals, the highest cause of premature mortality was suicide. And it depends on whether their cases were reported to the leader mortality survey. But it is a almost unexpected finding which has been repeated 3 years now. The highest cause of mortality being suicide in autistic adults without a learning disability. So the number two group is really important, and if you look at the epidemiological surveys in that area, while the population prevalence of autism is 1%, Sam Tromans in Leicester, who did his PhD on this, looked at the prevalence of autism within secondary care psychiatric inpatient units, and his summary figure was about 10 to 12%. So you almost have a tenfold increase, many of those cases undiagnosed and therefore not reflected in formulation and treatment plans. And then you have a third group, which is a combination of 1 and 2. So people who once had access and then have dropped off and so on. And I'm deviating from education theory and setting the background with an example, a case report that many of us could identify with. So imagine Adam, who is a 22-year-old man. In mid-childhood, he is diagnosed, he presents with challenging behavior, but he is diagnosed with autism and ADHD. He is treated with stimulants, poor response, he responds well to the second-line medication. He goes on to do very well in school and A-levels and goes to university. At the age of 18, CAMS discharges him because young Adam decides that he is well enough, he wants to be a normal teenager and not take medication. So he is not handed over to adult mental health services. 2 years, he is generally okay, but in the final year of university, there's worsening impulsivity and inattention. Some people think the ADHD features are coming back. And this is where Adam gets into that category 2 or 3, because those features are not occurring in isolation. He's using cannabis, he drops out of an apprenticeship, and he's increasingly socially withdrawn and spending most of his time in his room and neglecting his personal care. He's described as emotionally labile with apparent low mood. He has returned now to live with his parents, and this is where he doesn't fit the criteria for any service. So he has severe anger outbursts but hasn't assaulted anyone. He is very low and expresses ideas of hopelessness and life being worthless, but he's made no attempts at self-harm or suicide. It's he's not particularly, he's not against consultations, but he's not particularly motivated to go anywhere. So parents contact the GP, and at least in their part of the world, they are told that community mental health team will not accept the referral because this looks like ADHD. He is signposted instead to the local autism ADHD adult diagnostic service, which unfortunately has a very long waiting list. People like Adam are not outliers. Every CMHD that we have, there might be the odd exception, but most of the places where we did these presentations in the build up to the course identified with stories like this. And so someone like Adam is coming somewhere between 2 and 3. He was once known to services. He is now not known to services, but struggling to gain access. We wanted to create a course, a foundation course and an enhanced course, which would, in the first instance, empower psychiatrists and primary care physicians to diagnose, formulate, and make preliminary treatment plans more confidently. And we wanted to create a course which would address the core features of autism. And this is a refresher for you, and Rauf will cover this in greater detail. So the 3 core autistic triad features of reciprocal social interaction, communication, and a restricted pattern of interest with all those. So our preliminary modules would address some of the things that are coming up there. Crucially, we wanted to, rather than train people on how to work in an autism diagnostic clinic, we wanted to create a training environment where they would identify and pick up possible autistic spectrum traits existing alongside conventional expressions of psychopathology. So if you think about Adam and think about differential diagnosis, it could be anything from substance misuse and adjustment disorder to he's a 20-year-old to the onset of an enduring mental illness like psychosis or a mood disorder. And our aim was to frame training in autism against the background of that kind of mixed everyday psychopathology that most psychiatrists see. And for that, we relied on some work already done by Tom Burney of Newcastle, who is one of the most inspirational teachers I have heard on this subject. And Tom draws the parallel of the northern sky when he describes neurodevelopmental disorders, and we incorporated that into the course. He asks you to imagine Orion's belt and conceptualize the 3 brightest stars of the Orion and imagine them as the autistic triad that you already saw. These 3 autistic triad stars don't exist in isolation. They exist in close proximity to a number of other neurodevelopmental conditions which are coming up there. So from dyscalculia and dyspraxia to impulsivity and overactivity, they are all existing in close proximity on the neurodevelopmental spectrum. And some of those stars, Tom would say, cluster together. So attention deficit, impulsivity, and overactivity clusters together as ADHD. Vocal and motor tics and obsessive compulsive features cluster as Tourette's. And because they are in such close proximity, that is the reality that you see in your secondary care clinics. Pure ADHDs and pure ASDs occurring as a comorbid condition often happen only in the imagination of specialist diagnostic clinics. In the messy reality of clinical practice, we wanted to highlight what Tom called those hybrid disorders. So a presentation of someone with a mental illness pathology having a neurodevelopmental condition which is just that little bit atypical for ADHD and just that little bit atypical for ASD. We wanted to highlight in the course, therefore, that for the practicing psychiatrists in secondary or tertiary care, you often see a mixture of psychopathology, the core components of autism, the autistic triad, other developmental disorders which coexist with that, predominantly the ADHD cluster, and comorbid mental illnesses. And we wanted to highlight that when developmental conditions occur, they rarely occur on their own. They come in battalions. And the aim of the course is to unpick the diagnostic complexity. First, explore the relationship between the different neurodevelopmental disorders, and then how the neurodevelopmental disorders overlap with mental disorders, whether they are mental illnesses or indeed personality or other difficulties. So if we come back to the service setting, waiting lists are the predominant story, and waiting lists which are almost unimaginably long. 16-year-olds being referred and not getting an appointment till they have crossed into adulthood. So in that original classification, we wanted to emphasize the point that people who are already known to psychiatric services or in the process of being referred to community teams and professionals dealing with them would be our primary audience. And that is how the National Autism Training Programme for Psychiatrists was set up. It was delivered mostly in 2023 and 2024. The contract was signed by around this time of the year in 2022, and there was a tight time frame, as there is with many of these things. So in 3 months after signing the contract with what was then Health Education England, which had almost evolved to NHS England, within 3 months the first live event was scheduled, and the plan was people would access the course material for 12 months and there would be more cohorts. We slightly, because of the overwhelming interest, we upped the expected numbers from 500 to 650 for the foundation course and 50 to 100. And as you will see in Ellen's evaluation, that went up further, and we ended up with almost 1,500 in the foundation course and about 250 or thereabout with the enhanced course. That slide is a paraphrasing of what I covered in the introduction. So we wanted psychiatrists to identify the possibility of autism, make a working diagnosis in what we rather unimaginatively call straightforward cases. But it is really a question of not missing the developmental condition and then formulate, make reasonable adjustments. And it was targeted at consultants, specialty doctors, and call it psychiatry trainees, psychiatry residents now. We wanted to focus in particular on general adult mental health, inpatient settings, and the other specialities we have mentioned. In other words, we felt that people working in child psychiatry and learning disability psychiatry already had an adequate skill base for this. Yeah, so that was the foundation course, and when it came to the enhanced course, that was really meant for a smaller cohort. So if you were looking for appointments into specialist autism assessment or treatment centers, or for a smaller cohort of senior trainees, SPRs, and consultants, but aiming to set up specialist autism services as a tertiary service. There was an executive steering group, and these things Ralph will cover in greater detail. But that third bullet point is quite important. Right from the start, co-production was not a fad for the course. We had, by competitive interviews, 3 experts by experience. 2 of them were PhD students in Oxford. One was already connected with the child psychiatry faculty of the college, and they contributed quite actively as very equal partners to all aspects of the course design, including the sometimes vexing topic of, is it a disorder, is it a condition, is it neurodivergence, is it fair to think of it as an illness, and so on. So active collaboration, at the same time a certain acknowledgement that we are equipping psychiatrists to diagnose autism as part of the ICD-10, and the D in ICD is disease, whether you agree or not. You can call it a disorder, but our aim is really not to reinvent new diagnostic systems, but equip people on what currently exists. And the content development was led by recognized experts in autism, many of them drawn from the neurodevelopmental special interest group at the college, and Tom Burney and Peter Carpenter, two of the pioneers in this field, have to be particularly named in that list. I'll wait for Rauf to give you more details of exactly how. The general principle is both courses will start with a one-day face-to-face meeting and then a series of modules that you complete. If you were on the enhanced course, you also had a community of practice and a mentor. And finally, there was an assessment phase to complete that. So you wouldn't complete the course by attending the face-to-face training, but by working through the modules and engaging with the community of practice. And this was the degree of interest. I mean, I wait for Ellen to show you the full numbers, but the college launched it on a Friday afternoon on their website, and within 36 hours, we had reached capacity. My own daughter didn't get a place because I had told her it was coming out and please register. And she thought it was the weekend and so on. And Monday morning it was sold out. It was free at the point of delivery because that was the nature of the contract with NHS England. So that might explain some of those over signing up. But then, so we expected a 20% drop off. People sign for anything which is free and then they don't turn up. But that didn't happen. So there was this enormous degree of interest, and the same thing with the enhanced course also, which was much more demanding of time, and you will see that in some of the qualitative comments later. So that is the last line. It demonstrates that there is a desire among the psychiatrist community, a desire to learn more about autism. And if you want more details on the background or a review of how it relates to your clinical practice of psychiatry, feel free to